James Jimmy Amabile left his house one ordinary winter evening and was never seen alive again. It was December 2003. Snow fell gently over Ridley Township, Pennsylvania. The kind of quiet evening where the world feels frozen in time. Jimmy, a devoted father and hard-working man, had one simple plan that night: to pick up his daughters from their babysitter, a routine drive he'd made countless times before. A short trip that should have taken less than 10 minutes. But Jimmy never made it. When he didn't arrive, his family assumed traffic had delayed him. When an hour passed, they began to worry. By morning, that worry had turned into dread. His SUV was gone. His phone went silent. No trace of him, no clues, no goodbyes. Just an empty driveway and a family left with questions that grew heavier by the hour. Police searched the streets, nearby rivers, and wooded areas. Yet there was nothing. No skid marks, no eyewitnesses, no signs of an accident. It was as if the man had simply vanished off the face of the earth. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. His loved ones posted flyers, made calls, and organized search parties. Still, the silence was deafening. The cold winter roads offered no answers. The Delaware River, winding its dark way through the township, seemed to whisper secrets only it could keep. For 15 long years, Jimmy's name lingered in the air. A ghostly reminder of a mystery that refused to fade. A devoted father, a familiar face, gone without a trace. His family never stopped searching, never stopped believing that somewhere, somehow, they'd find him. But what no one knew, not the police, not the divers, not even those who searched the waters time and time again, was that Jimmy was never far away. He had been waiting all along, just beneath the surface, only a few hundred feet from where he was last seen. And when his story finally surfaced, after 15 years, it would change everything. James Jimmy Amabile was the kind of man everyone in Ridley Township knew by name. A devoted father, a loyal friend, and a man who lived a simple, honest life. Born and raised in Pennsylvania, Jimmy built his world around two things: his family and his community. He worked hard, kept to routines, and loved his daughters more than anything in the world. His life wasn't about luxury or fame. It was about stability, dependability, and the quiet pride of being a father who always showed up. By December of 2003, Jimmy was 38 years old. He lived alone, balancing work and fatherhood after separating from his wife. Despite life's challenges, he never lost focus on what mattered most: being there for his two girls. Every evening, he'd pick them up from their babysitter, drive them home, and make sure they were safe and happy. He wasn't the type to disappear, not the kind to run away, and certainly not the kind to leave his children waiting. The night he vanished began like any other. It was cold, with temperatures dropping below freezing. Jimmy had finished work and was running slightly behind schedule. Around 6 p.m., he called the babysitter, apologizing for being late and saying he'd be there shortly. It was the last time anyone heard his voice. Investigators would later piece together the timeline. Jimmy left his home, got into his green Ford Explorer, and began the short drive through Ridley Township toward his babysitter's neighborhood. He was familiar with the roads, narrow suburban streets that wound past the Delaware River, and small residential blocks. Yet, somewhere along that short route, something went terribly wrong. His car never arrived. His phone stopped responding. When he didn't show up, the babysitter assumed he'd been delayed and waited. Hours passed before concern spread. By the next morning, Jimmy's family filed a missing persons report. Police launched an immediate search. The initial days were filled with questions and confusion. Jimmy had no history of depression, no financial troubles that might suggest he'd walk away from his life. His bank accounts, credit cards, and phone records all went silent that night. There was no sign of foul play, no evidence of an accident, and no goodbye letter. It simply made no sense. Friends described him as dependable to a fault, the kind of person who would call if he were running 5 minutes late. His sudden disappearance broke every pattern of his life. As days passed with no sign of him, the community's unease turned into disbelief. Flyers covered telephone poles. Volunteers combed the roadsides, bridges, and nearby parks. Local police dragged sections of the Delaware River, suspecting perhaps an accident, but the water yielded nothing. For the family, the worst part wasn't the absence. It was the not knowing. His daughters grew up with hope flickering like a candle that refused to die, believing that someday, somehow, their father would return. Holidays passed. Birthdays came and went. The family never stopped searching. Every tip was followed, every rumor investigated. Yet the roads and the river kept their secret. As years turned into more than a decade, the case of James "Jimmy" Amabile faded from headlines, but not from memory. To the people who loved him, time never dulled the pain. Somewhere in Ridley Township, beneath familiar bridges and winding back roads, the truth of what happened that night waited, silent, patient, and buried beneath layers of silt and years of unanswered questions. From the moment James "Jimmy" Amabile was reported missing, the search began with urgency and confusion. Police immediately canvassed Ridley Township, retracing the short route between his home and the babysitter's house, a drive that should have taken only 10 minutes. When neither Jimmy nor his green Ford Explorer appeared, alarm bells rang. Local authorities issued a missing persons alert, and within 24 hours, ground teams were deployed. Officers checked parking lots, wooded areas, and nearby rivers. Helicopters scanned from above, their lights cutting through the winter fog. Divers combed the Delaware River and its tributaries, but the cold, murky waters offered no clues. Days became weeks. Investigators followed dozens of leads, none of which went anywhere. There were no witnesses who had seen his car leave the area, no signs of a crash, no tire marks near guardrails. For all intents and purposes, Jimmy Amabile had vanished without a trace. Detectives began exploring every possibility. Could he have been carjacked? Could he have suffered a medical emergency and driven off-road? Or was there something darker at play? Yet nothing fit. Jimmy's phone had gone silent almost immediately after his call to the babysitter, and no unusual activity appeared on his bank accounts or credit cards. There was no ransom note, no sign of a struggle, no hint of foul play. As the weeks turned into months, the case began to cool. Flyers that once lined telephone poles faded in the weather. The media moved on to new stories. But Jimmy's family refused to give up. His brother and close friends organized their own searches, driving through neighboring towns, checking back roads, and questioning residents who might have seen his car that night. Every effort ended the same way, with more questions than answers. Police eventually theorized that Jimmy's disappearance was likely accidental. The roads near the river were slick, unlit, and bordered by embankments that dropped sharply toward the water. It was possible, they said, that his car had gone off the road and into the river. But multiple sonar sweeps turned up nothing. The technology available in 2003 was limited, and murky conditions made underwater searches nearly impossible. Over time, the case was labeled inactive, though not forgotten. Each passing year, family members renewed public appeals for information. They kept his name alive, hoping someone somewhere, would remember something. But the silence persisted. By the 10th anniversary of his disappearance, Jimmy's story had become one of Ridley Township's most haunting unsolved mysteries. Locals still spoke of the father who vanished without a trace, the man who'd simply disappeared between two familiar roads. Search teams, both official and volunteer, had explored every nearby body of water at least once, but none had found a trace of his SUV. Then, nearly 15 years later, new technology reignited hope. Advanced side-scan sonar and 3D imaging allowed modern divers to see what previous searches could not. Volunteer search teams, equipped with this technology, began revisiting old cases that had gone cold for decades. Among those names was James Jimmy Amabile. In early 2018, searchers returned to the Ridley Township area with high-resolution sonar equipment. They mapped the water beneath the bridge near the Ridley Marina, an area that had been searched long ago, but never thoroughly scanned. As the sonar passed over the dark riverbed, a distinct shape appeared on the screen. Rectangular, metallic, the unmistakable outline of a vehicle. The image froze the team. After 15 years of unanswered questions, they had found something that could finally bring closure. A vehicle submerged in darkness, hidden beneath layers of silt and time. Could it really be Jimmy? The divers prepared for descent, unaware that they were about to uncover a truth that had been waiting in silence for a decade and a half. Beneath that still, cold water lay not just a car, but the end of a story that had haunted an entire community. The water was still that morning, calm in a way that almost felt unnatural. Beneath the gray winter sky, the team launched their small boat and positioned it over the sonar marker that had caught their attention the day before. For 15 years, Ridley Township had passed over this stretch of water countless times, fishermen, joggers, and even search teams. Yet no one had ever realized what lay just beneath the surface. As the divers suited up, the air was heavy with anticipation. Every movement was deliberate, every breath measured. The sonar reading was clear. The object below wasn't debris, wasn't rock or junk. It was large, box-shaped, unmistakably a vehicle. The divers checked their equipment one final time before slipping quietly into the cold, black water. Visibility was nearly zero. Each inch forward stirred up clouds of silt, turning the world around them into a thick haze. The riverbed sloped downward, and within moments, the beam of a flashlight hit metal. There it was, the outline of a Ford Explorer, partially embedded in mud, perfectly preserved by time and current. The divers circled the vehicle slowly. The front end was facing downward, the roof angled toward the riverbank, suggesting it had entered the water nose first. The windows were still intact, the paint faded and darkened by years of exposure. And then came the confirmation. The license plate. It matched the record of James Jimmy Amabile's missing SUV. For a few seconds, the team didn't speak. They didn't have to. After 15 years of searching, questioning, and hoping, they had finally found him. Jimmy had never left Ridley Township. He had been there the entire time, waiting in silence beneath the water his car had plunged into that fateful night. The recovery operation began immediately. Authorities secured the area and brought in a crane to lift the vehicle from the water. Onlookers gathered quietly at the river's edge, watching as history and heartbreak surfaced. As the muddy water poured off the SUV, the truth became visible to everyone. The vehicle was almost perfectly preserved, a time capsule of that December night in 2003. Inside, the remains of James Jimmy Amabile were discovered. Personal items were still present: his keys, wallet, and belongings untouched by time. The coroner's report later confirmed what investigators had long suspected. There were no signs of foul play. Jimmy had likely suffered a medical emergency, possibly a diabetic incident, and lost control of his vehicle, sending it into the water. The current had swallowed the car completely, concealing it from every earlier search. When word spread that Jimmy had finally been found, Ridley Township fell silent. For those who remembered his disappearance, it was a moment that mixed grief with relief. A man who had been missing for nearly 2 decades was finally coming home. The discovery brought answers, but it also brought the sobering truth that sometimes the simplest explanations hide in plain sight, waiting for the right eyes and the right technology to uncover them. The recovery was more than just the end of a mystery. It was a release. For his daughters, now grown, it meant the end of 15 years of uncertainty. For his friends, it meant no more imagining endless possibilities. And for the community, it was a reminder that closure doesn't erase pain. It just gives it shape. As the SUV was lifted from the water, dripping and silent, the reflection of the river seemed almost to bow. A father had finally come home. The 15-year mystery of James Jimmy Amabile had surfaced at last. When the news broke that James Jimmy Amabile had finally been found after 15 long years, it was as if time stopped for everyone who had ever known his name. For his family, it wasn't just the end of a mystery. It was the end of sleepless nights, unanswered questions, and the constant wondering of where he might be. His daughters, who had grown up without their father, could finally say goodbye. For them, the discovery meant more than anyone outside the family could ever understand. It wasn't closure in the traditional sense, because closure never truly comes when you lose someone like that. But it was peace. A peace that had been stolen by 15 years of silence. Investigators later revealed how close they'd been to the truth all along. The location where Jimmy's vehicle was discovered was within just a short distance of his intended route home. For years, the answer had been lying quietly in the dark water, untouched, unseen, waiting. The sonar technology that finally located his SUV wasn't available in 2003, a cruel reminder of how time and technology often decide when a family gets to heal. Locals who remembered the night he went missing came forward to share their memories. Some recalled the posters plastered across Ridley Township, the vigils held in his honor, and the way the story had quietly faded from headlines but never from hearts. Others expressed disbelief that the truth had been so close for so long, hidden under the same waters they'd fished and walked beside for years. Jimmy's story became more than just a solved case. It became a symbol of how, even after years of silence, the truth can still rise to the surface. It reminded people that disappearance doesn't always mean foul play or malice. Sometimes it's an accident, a tragic twist of fate that leaves families chasing shadows for decades. In the months following the recovery, his remains were laid to rest with dignity and love. Friends, relatives, and community members gathered to honor the man they'd lost twice, once in 2003, and again when the reality of his fate finally hit. There were tears, of course, but also a quiet sense of gratitude, because now they knew. Now they could remember him for the man he was, not the mystery he became. The case of James Jimmy Amabile serves as a haunting reminder of how fragile life can be, how easily a turn in the wrong direction can change everything. But it also shows the power of persistence, of never giving up. Because somewhere, even after 15 years, the truth was waiting. Sometimes, the river doesn't give up its secrets easily. But when it does, it speaks volumes. And in that silence, Jimmy's story found its ending. If this story moved you as much as it did us, take a moment to honor the memory of James Jimmy Amabile by sharing this video. His story reminds us how fleeting life can be, and how answers can still surface even after years of uncertainty. Make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, because we bring you more real stories. Stories that deserve to be remembered. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe there are still hundreds of unsolved cases like Jimmy's, just waiting to be uncovered? Until next time, thank you for watching. Stay safe, and remember, every mystery has its truth.